Hello everybody, welcome to this week's episode of The County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. We are bringing you the show today from the state capitol, the office of the governor. Later we will be talking with Governor Gary Herbert. Our topic today is state sovereignty. Now people might ask, what does state sovereignty have to do with county government issues? But in reality it has a lot to do with it. You see, the major source of funding for counties to provide services like schools, school districts, jails, police protection, fire protection, mental health services all come from property tax. And they rely on the available lands being subject to property tax to generate those revenues. Well, if you live in a state like Virginia, 95% of the state is privately held. Therefore, the counties can generate the taxes they need to provide good services for the citizens. But when you cross that federal fault line that lies at Colorado to the west, the story changes. Where 95% of the land is privately held back east, out in the west, it could be 50 or 30, or in cases of Nevada, just barely over 20%. So how do you solve this problem when the federal government can't be taxed? That's where House Bill 148 came into play in the legislature. To give you some background on that, here's Dan Pope.
Imagine you're a family of 50. Now that's 50 siblings growing up. As the older siblings were growing up, they received more and more privileges. The younger siblings, seeing that the older siblings had those privileges, wanted the same thing. Unfortunately, the parents decided they weren't going to give the younger siblings the same privileges because of some of the mistakes that their older siblings had made.
The younger members of the family were only given access to a small portion of their inheritance, and after they had come of age, still had to ask their parents' permission for everything they wanted to do. The younger children felt it was unfair that their older siblings were trusted to make good decisions while they were not. Family matters aside, what if these children weren't children at all, but were the states of the Union? In this case, the states west of Colorado. And today they are wondering why the promises made by their parents, the federal government, at the time of statehood were not kept.
To think that you can trust Arkansas or Missouri or Minnesota with their lands, but you can't trust Utah, that doesn't make any sense.
The state of Utah was so concerned about their problems with large tracts of federal land within their borders that they have passed the Utah Transfer of Public Lands Act. The act establishes a deadline of December 31st, 2014 for the federal government to extinguish title to public lands within the state. There is a misunderstanding among people that the state will simply sell off the land into private ownership. However, there are 116 years of established public land use that must be accounted for.
Public lands, grazers, mineral rights holders, recreation interests, a whole community of stakeholders has grown up around those lands, and you just can't cut them off.
The state of Utah is stepping up, and they're creating a mechanism whereby they will be able to receive the land and come up with a matrix of how they would manage it. And this is why the state's being rational. So they're saying some land needs to be protected, this is how we will do it. Some land needs to be open for multiple use, so the state isn't trying to sell off everything.
Managing that multiple use for the sustained yield of the natural resource, which is incidentally what was promised under the Federal Land Policy Management Act.
This is not a new problem for Utah. In fact, the state has been trying to get the federal government to turn over undesignated federal lands since we became a state.
In 1915, the state legislature asked for its land. In 1930, there were congressional hearings on granting remaining unreserved lands back to the states. In 1934, the Taylor Grazing Act was passed to provide management until the federal lands were disposed of. And in 1976, the Federal Land Policy Management Act, or FLPMA, was passed by Congress declaring public lands would be retained in federal ownership, but the local governments would still have input on management decisions. That has been the problem for the state and counties, is that the Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service have made it increasingly more difficult to get anything done on public lands.
State and local budgets, our school budgets, are all directly affected by public lands in the state. There's a connection there that cannot be denied. And there's really a question whether our state is enjoying the true status of a state. Are we a state or are we a mere province? Are we a mere territorial outpost? Those are the kinds of questions that House Bill 148 raises. What does it mean to be a state?
And so to get to the point that some of our counties that have 80–90% of their land as federally sourced land means a tax base. It means taking 100% of the royalty revenues. It means the ability to unlock the SITLA lands that right now we're losing tens and hundreds of millions of dollars just because we can't access the state trust lands that we already own. That counties are certainly better situated to be able to deal with the land for those whose lives and livelihoods depend on that land.
Utah is not alone in seeking recognition as an adult state, capable of handling its own affairs. And other sibling states are watching to see what is happening. I'm Dan Pope for the county seat.
As an interesting update to Dan's story, just last week, the state of Arizona passed a bill very similar to House Bill 148 in the state of Arizona, and they are joining the ranks of Utah, a very weak version of the bill already passed in Colorado, and other western states, a total of 5, considering similar legislation to develop a unified front. Well, to discuss the impacts and the implementation of House Bill 148, we will have as our guest Governor Gary Herbert to talk about that when we come back on the county seat. Stay with us.
Believe it or not, summer isn't far away, and neither is Juab County. There's no need to travel far to find that perfect family adventure. June 30th, get your blood pumping at the Juab County Extreme Enduro. You've never seen a race like this. In mid-July, join us for our Ute Stampede Rodeo. And then in August, there's the big Demolition Derby that wraps up our county fair. Juab County. It'll change your family forever.
In order for there to be adventure, there must first be a land that offers it. In order for there to be discovery, there must first be something undiscovered. It's time you discovered northeastern Utah's dinosaur lands, the trails, water, beauty, and history that have been 65 million years in the making. Take your journey to a destination where adventure is only limited by your imagination. Join us in Uinta County, Undiscovered Utah.